Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Lin Li ordered an immediate return after getting on board of the Star. The massive ship crushed the surrounding ice as it started to operate. The sailors steered it in the direction of Four Seasons Island. The people from the Gilded Kingdom only surfaced from the pit of the gigantic hole at the heart of Ice Island 3 days after the Star left the island. Edmund could sense that Lin Li was not on Ice Island anymore. Hence, he did not try to find Linley, but let his men slowly ride the airship towards where they came from. Yes, you did not read it wrongly, they were certainly moving at the slowest speed. This airship that Linley left for them was only a sample that was built out of interest. It was definitely worse than the airships built by goblins. To make things worse, this was an airship that had no motor compartment. Hence, it had to rely on human labor to operate. The mages had to constantly input their mana to let the airship move in the sky. Saint Edmund, Elder Zoomer, called out to Edmund outside his cabin. He had suffered less injuries than Edmund, and had fully recovered after a few days of rest. He suddenly thought of a problem that they had neglected. Although Edmund was more powerful than Elder Zoomer, the interruption caused by Power's sneak attack created a backlash on his mental strength and soul when he was conducting the ritual to retrieve the holy artifact. While it was not easy for one to subject their mental strength and soul to attacks, it would become a real problem if one were to injure them. Hence, Edmund chose a cabin to concentrate on recovering his injuries immediately after boarding the airship. Edmund woke up from his meditation when he heard Elder Zoomer's voice. "Come in," responded Edmund as he opened his eyes slowly. Elder Zoomer entered with a forlorn expression. He was completely devoid of the excitement he had after they accomplished the mission. Edmund could not help but feel surprised when he saw Elder Zoomer's expression. Now that they had accomplished their mission, had President Felix promised to help them speed up the resurrection of Lord Aquilo, and were also on their way back. What could be troubling Zoomer again? "Zoomer, are you facing any issue with the recovery from your injuries?" asked Edmund. The only thing that Edmund could imagine would trouble Zoomer was about his recovery. After all, High Priest Power entered the peak of the Sanctuary Realm with the help of the power from the Eye of Light, and his powers greatly surpassed Elder Zoomer's. He thought that there were still complications in the injuries Zoomer had gotten from Power. However, Zoomer shook his head after hearing Edmund's question. "Saint Edmund, do you still remember the message that Power sent back to the Illuminati when we first met President Felix from the Tower of Dusk?" asked Zoomer. "What did you say?" "Damn it, how could I forget this?" exclaimed Edmund as he sprang from his seat and started pacing around the space. "That bastard." I was still feeling relieved that we would not ever have to deal with any troubles caused by him ever again. How could I let that slip my mind? To say the truth, Edmund had definitely not been sincere in his initial partnership with the Tower of Dusk. He had felt threatened by Lin Li's ability, and wanted to treat the tower as his cannon fodder, and leave all of them there forever. He had not expected there to be so many happenings that would change his perspective of the Tower of Dusk. Because of that, he had been turning a blind eye to all the tricks that High Priest Power had plotted against the Tower of Dusk as long as it would not trigger a direct confrontation. After all, the people from the Tower of Dusk had been as good as dead to Edmund. He certainly had not minded when Power had not reported any information back. As a result, he had not managed to curb Power's growing ambition. Power had become susceptible to the God of Light's temptation and turned into his servant. They even had to get help from Linley to stop Power. Then, the hopes of speeding up Aquilo's resurrection had fallen upon Linley, and the relationship between both of the forces had taken a turn too. Edmund could not believe that he would have forgotten about Power's disastrous actions if not for Zoomer's reminder. "I doubt the people in the Gilded Kingdom would stir any trouble. I remember Power's son has already been removed from his position as the commander of the 5th Fleet and is now reflecting on his actions at home. Even if Power managed to send that message out, I don't think his useless son would be able to do anything about it." Edmund spoke after some time. It was as if he was trying to convince himself about this possibility. "I think we should still hurry back. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the people there would really create a huge problem for us," suggested Elder Zoomer. Although he agreed with Edmund's idea, Zoomer believed that it would be safer for him to return to Four Seasons Island as soon as possible. "Alright, since we do not have any other matters here, let's head back to Four Seasons Island once we get on the ship," agreed Edmund as he nodded. However, Edmund and Zoomer saw a depressing sight when the airship brought them to the place where the Gilded Kingdom had docked their ships. Their battleships had turned into ice sculptures, and from the aura that the sculptures emitted, they could tell that they were the work of the Ice Phoenix. Their trip back would become more troublesome without the ships. It was impossible for them to fly back to Four Seasons Island as they had yet to fully recover from their injuries. They were glad to have Lin Li's airship. If not, they could only get stalled until the two sanctuary powerhouses recovered from their injuries. However, The speed of this airship was absolutely frustrating. It was like a cloud that was floating extremely slowly in the sky. Only God knew when they would float back to Four Seasons Island. Perhaps it would not even happen after Edmund and Zoomer recovered from their injuries. Just when Edmund and Zoomer were worrying about the message that Power had sent back to Four Seasons Island, two young men were sitting in the capital of the Gilded Kingdom on Four Seasons Island, sipping wine while enjoying the dance performed by a group of gorgeous dancers. Brother Cantori, I doubt the fella from the Tower of Dusk will be able to return. Why can't we do anything to the people we have caught? That was the beloved son of High Priest Power, Delano. His father's departure had returned him his freedom to do whatever he liked, as long as he kept a low profile, and did not let his majesty know of his activities. He was basically as free as ever. Cantori smiled gently when he heard Delano's impatient question. He put down his wine glass, and said, "What's your hurry? Since that Fulik fella is not going to be back, aren't there people naturally at our disposal?" But the people from the breezy plains had yet to believe this news. "We can only wait for your father's return to extinguish their hopes fully. Why don't we get rid of the people from the breezy plains together with them? Aren't they merely legendary powerhouses? How big of an issue would that make?" "Brother, even if you are not willing to mobilize the Illuminati for that, I can easily do it with the connections I have in the kingdom," replied Delano disdainfully. He was slightly drunk, and was too lazy to weigh any consequences. He only wanted to eliminate all his enemies to avenge his wounded pride. It did not help that he was someone brainless in nature. "Delano, can you use your brains more often? That fella from the Tower of Dusk has already died on the cursed island. He has nothing to do with us. I'm also certain that there would not be a good ending for the people he had left here for their offense against the noble prince of this kingdom. As for the people from the breezy plains, each of them is backed by massive organizations. It will only be beneficial for us to convince them to join our camp," said Cantori after he gestured to send the dancers away. He was definitely more meticulous than Delano. Delano was slightly awakened by Cantori's reprimand, but while he was not convinced, he did not dare to show it. Although he had a high status in the kingdom for being the son of the kingdom's high priest, his status was definitely lacking as compared to Cantori, who was the candidate for the Illuminatus' next lord. Cantori knew that it would not make sense for him to include such a fop in any conspiracy. Hence, he only warned Delano not to spoil his plans, and did not care to make any explanation. "All right, you just keep your hands out of this matter. You will be able to seek your revenge one day. You have to return now." "I would be punished if His Majesty were to know of our meeting," said Cantori. "Ha ha, brother Cantori, you have to be joking. You are the Lord of Illuminati. Even the king has to be polite to you. How would he punish you?" "Well, I will return then. Fulik is definitely an unfortunate fella. He can't even see the end of his men now," said Delano as he stumbled out of the door. Although Cantori looked down on Delano, he was rather gleeful when he heard Delano refer to him as the Lord. As a successful disciple of the Illuminati and a savior by prophecy, Cantori was certain that he was the only one who had the right to be the next lord. In reality, Cantori was indifferent to the news that Delano shared with him. So what if it was impossible for Fulik from the Tower of Dusk to return to this place? The people from the tower that he left behind were only ants with level 15 abilities. There was no need to waste his efforts on them. He only had to find some trash with the title of a prince to accuse the ants of committing a lese-majest. He believed that helping Delano retaliate against the tower would help him gain an extra layer of insurance if he had the support from High Priest Power to help him rise to the seat as the next lord of the Illuminati. What really mattered to Cantori were the representatives from the breezy plains. If he could win them over, he would be able to strengthen his support base and put the Illuminati and Gilded Kingdom in a good light. Hence, what he needed was not to think about how he could deal with the people from the Tower of Dusk, but to convince the representatives from the breezy plains of the fall of the tower. At the same time, a massive behemoth came speeding over from the northern part of Four Seasons Island. It was traveling in the ocean at a speed that did not match its size. Its name, the Star, that was painted on the body of the ship was clearly visible to the small ships around it. After leaving the mysterious part of the sea, the Star traveled at full speed for 3 to 4 days. They finally saw the silhouette of Four Seasons Island from afar. When they first got there, they used a dozen days to travel in the region just to locate Ice Island. Now that they were returning, they only had to move in a single direction towards where they came from. Naturally, the return trip was much faster. Soon, the Star entered the crowded Helena port under the amazement of countless people. Yet, Linley did not bring his men down the ship. Instead, he opened an alternative dimension in the pilot house and led his men through the crack in space. They returned to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk at the Gilded Kingdom. However, just when Linley passed through the crack and stepped into the embassy, a figure came rushing at him. It was Prince Jeremiah of the Leaden Kingdom. "President Fulik, Why are you only back now? Trouble's huge, exclaimed Jeremiah. He was holding a few nautical reports that were from Linley's room. He definitely did not come here to wait for Linley's return. Linley recognized the items in Jeremiah's hands immediately, but he did not take it to heart. Since he chose to leave the items in his room, they were definitely not treasures to him. However, one's man trash might be another's treasure. Those items were of some value to a nautical rookie like Jeremiah. Hence, Linley pretended not to see the items the prince was holding. Oh, it's Prince Jeremiah. I didn't expect that you would be the first one I met when I arrived. But, what trouble were you talking about? What happened? Jeremiah initially felt rather embarrassed when he saw Linley here. After all, his actions were akin to thieving. He only felt much better when he realized that Linley did not take the matter to heart. President Flick, why weren't you contactable for the past several weeks? Your men were arrested by the people from the Gilded Kingdom, in your absence, cried Jeremiah anxiously. Oh, responded Linley as he frowned gently. Linley had previously left the weaker sailors in Helenaport because he thought about the potential dangers on Ice Island. These sailors were around level 15 and level 16, and had no significance to the Tower of Dusk. He believed that no one would want to waste any time on them. Furthermore, the saga around the Fifth Fleet had just ended, and he was confident that no one from the Gilded Kingdom would dare to create any trouble for the tower. However, some things were just very ridiculous. Linley really did not expect or understand why people from the Gilded Kingdom would put their crosshairs on those sailors. Seeing that Linley might be unconvinced, Jeremiah grew even more anxious. Hey, there was even a rumor that you went to that cursed place and would never be back. Because of that, they even directed significant pressure on those people from the breezy plains. There would have been a high chance for them to surrender to the Gilded Kingdom had you returned a few days later, explained Jeremiah. The people from the Gilded Kingdom knew I went to the cursed island, thought Linley. The first possible culprit behind the rumor that came to Linley's mind was Power. That old man definitely did not expect himself to be the one who was not going to return to this piece of land. As for the sailors who were arrested, Linley could also guess that it had to be done by Delano, the man who hated him to the bones. He knew that no one else would see any value in those sailors. However, although the sailors were only employed under the name of the tower, Linley certainly wasn't intending to leave them there. Maybe it's time to let some people know I have returned from that cursed island, thought Linley, smirking. Seems like they have not learned enough from the case of the Fifth Fleet. Jeremiah couldn't help but feel unsettled by Linley's smirk. President Flick, I'm here because I'm scared that your things might be destroyed by them, and wanted to help you put them away. Now that you are back, I should return them to you, he said hurriedly as he handled the nautical reports to Linley. Although he knew that he would be able to be complimented by the king of the Leaden Kingdom if he were to bring the reports back, he really did not dare to test Linley's personality. Linley glanced at those materials and said, these reports are not of use to me anymore. If you are interested, you can just bring them back. Although Linley was a man who did not like to get the short end of the stick, he was never a stingy man. Since Jeremiah shared such a piece of news with him, he thought that he could just reward him with those materials. Jeremiah couldn't believe his ears when he heard Linley, but he quickly snugged those reports back in his arms ecstatically. Are you sure you are giving them to me? I have been so busy and was of no help to you. How could I keep such precious gifts? Asked Jeremiah embarrassingly. While the nautical reports were of no use to Linley, they contained crucial information to help the Leaden Kingdom expand their reach into the waters. They were a door to the endless ocean. Although Jeremiah had already obtained the duplicated copy of the nautical reports, when he was helping Linley gather the information about the cursed island, there wasn't anything that could really describe the endless ocean. The information from the Gilded Kingdom was not comprehensive enough. Moreover, the Leaden Kingdom did not have much nautical expertise. Even if they acquired the information provided by the Gilded Kingdom, it would require great investment to study it thoroughly. The notes that Linley had just given him were filled with his own notes and interpretations. They were definitely superior to the resources shared by the Gilded Kingdom. Linley waved his hands to signal to Jeremiah that he did not need to be so concerned about the gifts. Are you in a rush? If not, would you like to share more with me about the recent happenings? Asked Linley. How could I be busy? Sure. Let's do that, responded Jeremiah excitedly. He felt really honored to be able to have such a chat with the sanctuary powerhouse. He would definitely choose this opportunity over the need to save his house if it were on fire. He got a harsh lashing the last time from his kingdom due to his actions at the Sky Castle. Hence, this was the perfect time for him to build a rapport with Linley. Although Jeremiah was a prince and was a gilded and foppish man, he was not totally useless. His personality made him many connections when he got to the Gilded Kingdom. Furthermore, he He was the special envoy of the Leaden Kingdom. Since the Leaden Kingdom and Gilded Kingdom had no direct conflict in their respective interests, the Leaden Kingdom would not be implicated even if the Gilded Kingdom were vying for the Breezy Plains. As the Breezy Plains rightly belonged to the Felon Kingdom, the people from the Gilded Kingdom did not deliberately shun Jeremiah, either. Of course, Linley did not care about what attitudes the higher authorities in the Gilded Kingdom had towards the Breezy Plains. His main reason for chatting with Jeremiah was to find out about his men and the reasons behind their arrest. After all, Linley would not have a clear understanding of all their personalities, as the sailors on the Star were only employees of the Tower of Dusk. He wouldn't be surprised if those sexually starved sailors turned into lusty beasts when they set foot on land after they ended their long and boring sea voyage. Although Linley had always been biased toward his people, he was not an unreasonable man. While he would definitely rescue the sailors, he would also teach them a lesson if they really did anything outrageous. What Linley didn't expect was the huge commotion that came with the arrest of the lowly ranked sailors. As he saw it, it would be extremely easy for Delano to get rid of the sailors without attracting much attention. However, after learning more from Jeremiah, Linley only found the matter amusing. He was surprised to hear that the sailors were arrested due to the alleged crime of assaulting the Prince of the Gilded Kingdom. Frankly speaking, their profession was not only lowly, but also full of risks. There were just too many different circumstances in their months and years of voyage that would cause them to lose their lives, and no one with a little bit of talent wanted to commit to such a dangerous profession. Hence, it was absurd to hear that any sailor would dare to find themselves more trouble on land and subject themselves to more risks. Moreover, princes of any country had to be someone of prestige and power. Linley really could not imagine that any prince from the reputable Gilded Kingdom would enter a conflict with the sailors who were definitely beneath them. Furthermore, how would the bodyguards and servants of the prince allow their master to be beaten up? It would also be impossible for people as lowly as level 15 and 16 to even come close to the prince, let alone to beat him up. Linley really could not make sense of the story. He even started to wonder if that prince loved to play the game of secret visits. Jeremiah was not exactly sure of the situation either. He only knew that both parties met near a bar and started getting physical after some verbal disagreement. Only after the police arrived did they discover that it was the prince who was being beaten up. Hearing this, Linley was sure that it was a farce, and knew there was no need for him to understand anything else. He only wondered about the identity of that prince. How could a prince from the Gilded Kingdom agree to let himself be involved in such an act of assault? Did he have masochistic tendencies? Vincent, mused Jeremiah. He is only a distant nephew of the king of the Gilded Kingdom. Although he has the title of a prince, he only knows how to flaunt his wealth, and has no power at all, continued Jeremiah. Linley finally understood why a blockhead like Jeremiah would be so indignant when he spoke of Prince Vincent. He learned that the prince was the disgrace of the Gilded Kingdom. Not only did he know nothing about governance, he was merely a wimp in level 10. It would have been better if he had been an ordinary man, as it was not unusual for someone without status to be stuck in level 1. However, as Vincent was the prince of the Gilded Kingdom, he had access to all the resources since his birth. If all the riches and resources could only bring him up till level 10, he really was a useless person. Although Prince Jeremiah had a foppish personality, he was at least in the legendary realm, and his knowledge and governance gave him the qualifications to be the emissary of the Leaden Kingdom. Moreover, his ability to gather so many nautical reports from Linley would definitely be a huge contribution to his kingdom. As compared to Jeremiah, Prince Vincent only knew to abuse his authority as the prince to acquire loot around the town. He had a lot of businesses under his name in the Gilded Kingdom that were managed by people who wanted to borrow his title. The only thing that belonged solely to him was an island that was used as a fief. More importantly, he seemed completely oblivious to how the others were looking down on him. Having created never-ending troubles for King Bradler, he had his title removed a few times. Only with the plea from the other royals did he regain his title as a prince. Jeremiah's introduction of Vincent ascertained Linley's belief that his sailors had to have been framed by people with evil intentions. Knowing that, he would definitely not sit idly by even though the sailors were only the employees of the Tower of Dusk. Do you know where they're being held? Are they still in Port Helena? Asked Linley directly. Jeremiah became very excited once he heard Linley ask about it. Since it involved the people from the royal family, it was no longer considered an ordinary safety issue. They have been locked up in the capital's jail managed by the royal guards 2 days ago. Although the royal guards of the Gilded Kingdom were not as well known as the kingdom's naval fleet, which was known for their discoveries across various oceans, they were elites of the Gilded Kingdom. Their main responsibilities were to guard the kingdom and ensure the safety of all royals. Hence, since the sailors were convicted of assaulting the prince, their case had to be managed by the royal guards. Jeremiah was very clear that President Flick, who was standing before him was a figure who knew no fear. He was absolutely capable of retaliation, if he were to be provoked. The Fifth Fleet was immediately crippled by Lin Li merely for detaining the star. This time, although it was merely a few sailors who'd got into trouble, their immediate detention meant the lack of intention to negotiate with the Tower of Dusk. Jeremiah certainly could smell an impending drama. Sure enough, after hearing about the location where the sailors were being held, Linley stood up. Thanks for telling me this news. If the Gilded Kingdom is so persistent over a few sailors, it seems that I have to bring them back personally, Linley said to Jeremiah. Read latest of LS at NV.EL. Bye. Calm. Don't mention it, President Flick. This is my duty. Do you need me to put diplomatic pressure on the Gilded Kingdom, as the emissary of the Leaden Kingdom? Asked Jeremiah joyfully after hearing Linley's words of appreciation. He hurriedly took the opportunity to get on his good side. However, Linley did not accept Jeremiah's suggestion. I wouldn't be troubling you for such a small matter, said Linley as he waved his hands. In reality, Jeremiah was rather anxious after his words left his mouth. He was not afraid of rejection. He was afraid that Lin Li would accept his suggestion. As this was a conflict between the Tower of Dusk or the Breezy Plains and the Gilded Kingdom, there was no legitimate reason for the Leaden Kingdom to cast any political pressure on the Gilded Kingdom. After all, the Breezy Plains belonged to the Felon Kingdom, and was not a little bit related to the Leaden Kingdom. Hence, Jeremiah could not help but sigh in relief when he heard Linley rejecting his offer. Of course, he could only try to look disappointed by Linley's response. Lin Li was well aware of Jeremiah's thoughts, but there was nothing for him to bear a grudge for. Hence, Lin Li said nothing after rejecting Jeremiah. He brought his men and made a grand exit from the embassy. Jeremiah could not help but swallow a mouthful of saliva when he watched the group of people leave the embassy with Lin Li. As a legendary powerhouse, he had the ability to gauge the abilities of people around him through his senses. While he did not dare to get distracted doing that during his earlier conversation with Lin Li, Jeremiah got a shock when he discovered it as the group was leaving the space. Although Jeremiah knew that there was still a difference between true legendary powerhouses and those who reached the same realm with the help of magic, each and every legendary powerhouse from the Tower of Dusk emitted incredibly strong aura. Jeremiah was shocked to learn that these people seemed to have entered the realm for many years. When he was at Sky Castle, Jeremiah witnessed how terrifying the Tower of Dusk was with their net array. At that time, the net array was used by a bunch of archmages. He could not imagine its impact if it were to be used by this bunch of legendary powerhouses. Apart from the team that was made up of legendary powerhouses, what surprised Jeremiah even more was Linley's vampire servant, Norfaller. Although he had not yet entered the Sanctuary Realm, Jeremiah could sense the aura of the Sanctuary Realm from Norfaller. Although Jeremiah could not figure out Norfaller's capabilities in the Sanctuary Realm, he was certain of the threat that were to be posed by the vampire even if he was at the beginning stage of the realm. Vampires were natural assassins. An assassin with the abilities of the Sanctuary Realm would be a terrifying existence to anyone. Jeremiah tidied the stack of nautical reports in his arms and wiped the beads of sweat off his forehead. He could not help but gloat at the Gilded Kingdom's impending misery for offending the president of the Tower of Dusk. After Lin Li brought his men out of the door, he immediately attracted the attention of many representatives of the different forces. One could not possibly ignore the grand appearance of a team of legendary mages that was led by a sanctuary powerhouse. The guards from the Gilded Kingdom were definitely among those who were flabbergasted. Just as the team from the Tower of Dusk swerved across the sky, the different embassies flung their doors open. The guards from the Gilded Kingdom were the first to be flung out of the buildings, which Claus and the other representatives from the Breezy Plains came speeding out of next. They were all rushing after the Tower of Dusk. Although the people from the Breezy Plains had not offended anyone in this period of time, they were all placed under house arrest by the Gilded Kingdom. While they were under the eyes of normal guards, none of them dared to confront the Gilded Kingdom, as they weren't sure of the likelihood of Linley's return. After all, without the backing from a sanctuary powerhouse like Linley, their power as powerhouses in the peak of the legendary realm was definitely insignificant to the people in the Gilded Kingdom. The appearance of Lin Li, who had been rumored to have died in the cursed land, was like a stimulant to the people from the Breezy Plains. Their suppressed rage that had been accumulating over the past few days was let free. There was no way for the guards of the Gilded Kingdom to stop them. After catching up with the people from Tower of Dusk, Claus and the others really had an urge to speak to Lin Li and ask him about the rumor. But, seeing that Lin Li did not have any intention to care about them, they could only suppress their curiosity and follow behind his group obediently. Although the Gilded Kingdom was extremely large, such distance did not matter to the people who were flying in the air. The team did not take long before they landed at the main entrance of the grounds that were guarded by the royal guards. A ray of light from the team of mages blasted the main gate into ashes before the guards at the door could inquire about their intentions. It terrified the soldiers on duty and sent them fleeing into their campsite shouting for assistance. "We are being attacked. Quick, come and help. Mr. President, why don't we go straight in?" asked Doric, the deputy head of the Tower of Dusk. However, Linley waved his arms and rejected Doric's suggestion. "There's no rush. We are not unreasonable people who use violence for everything," said Linley, calmly, despite having just torn down Summon's gates upon arrival. Doric did not make further remarks or any expressions after hearing Linley's words. He simply returned to the team of mages to adjust their formation. Yet, Linley's words sent the people from the breezy plains into a shock. They were aware that many forces in the breezy plains were brought to immediate downfall over the past few years, as they had hindered the Tower of Dusk from achieving certain interests. Not long ago, the seizure of the star brought about the doom of the Fifth Fleet as well. They really could not accept Linley's comment when he said that they weren't unreasonable people who would resort to violence unnecessarily. Lin Li did not wait too long in front of the gate. Rapid footsteps could be heard rushing towards the main entrance, and a team of heavily armed soldiers came rushing out like a flood. They surrounded the people from the Tower of Dusk very quickly. Lin Li calmly waited at his original position and did not react to the situation at all. The air was filled with indifference as the other people from the Tower of Dusk glanced at the warriors from Gilded Kingdom. They knew that any mage from their organization would be able to eliminate all of these level 10 warriors in the blink of an eye if they wanted to. The warriors of Gilded Kingdom were not foolish to get physical with the people from the Tower of Dusk, either. Although they did not have the ability to sense how capable the people from the Tower of Dusk were, their legs were already trembling from the oppressive aura emitted by the legendary powerhouses. Just when the two sides seemed to be in a stalemate, footsteps and an arrogant shouting voice could be heard from the insides. Shoals, are the bastards from the breezy plains tired of living? I'm coming out to see who has the guts to destroy the doors that belong to the royal guards of the Gilded Kingdom. It was natural for the royal guards to be able to recognize the people from the breezy plains due to their long stay in the kingdom. Yet, no one could recognize Linley, as it had been quite some time since his departure, despite his receiving such a grand welcome by the kingdom and crippling the Fifth Fleet of the Gilded Kingdom. The people from the breezy plains grew angry when they heard that darn voice. Although they had been well respected by the Gilded Kingdom when they first arrived, it was because they were associated with Linley, a sanctuary powerhouse. They only discovered the reality when the attitudes towards them made a sharp turn, after Linley left to explore the cursed land. Although each of them was well respected for their power in the breezy plains, they were insignificant in the eyes of the Gilded Kingdom. The Gilded Kingdom had a high priest in the sanctuary realm, and numerous higher-ups in the legendary realm. This was not including the people from the Illuminati. What could the people from the breezy plains use to compare with the Gilded Kingdom? Accompanied by the sounds of footsteps and curses, several figures finally walked out of the gate of the camp. That unruly voice belonged to Delano, the son of the high priest. Delano, however, stood dumbfounded upon seeing Linley. He pointed at Linley speechlessly. It was as though someone was squeezing his throat, and he could not make a sound anymore. Beside Delano was a stern-looking middle-aged general. "How dare you create trouble at the camp of the royal guards of the Gilded Kingdom? Do you really think that the kingdom can't do anything to the people from the breezy plains?" he hollered at the crowd after taking 2 steps past Delano. That was the last straw for the people from the breezy plains. Linley's return gave them all the courage they could possibly need to go against the people in the Gilded Kingdom. They knew that the Gilded Kingdom was nothing compared to Linley, when the former kept silent after having their Fifth Fleet destroyed by the Tower. However, just when the people from the breezy plains were about to retaliate, Linley raised his arm and stopped them. "I am here to collect my people," said Linley in a tone devoid of emotion. His words triggered the rage of the middle-aged general. How could he ask for anyone's release when the first thing he did was to tear their gates? "Collect your people. Let me tell you, if you dare to do that today, I will." The furious general hollered until his gaze landed on Linley. Like Delano, he froze and lost his voice. The status of the middle-aged general was naturally not ordinary. With his power to lead the royal guards of the Gilded Kingdom, Linley was not a stranger to him, for he was one of the many people sent by King Bradler to welcome Linley when the latter set foot here. His position in the kingdom also gave him access to the truth behind the destruction of the Fifth Fleet, despite the kingdom's effort to deceive its people with their made-up story. Just now, the middle-aged general could only see the breezy plains people about to riot, but did not notice Linley standing among the crowd. As he suddenly realized that the man who had crippled the Fifth Fleet actually found his own subordinates, he was suddenly a little scared. He didn't want his guard unit to fall like the Fifth Fleet. At this time, Delano finally recovered from his horror. He pointed to Lin Li and shouted, no way. How can you come back? Didn't you die in the cursed land? Apologies for falling out of your expectations. I suppose you are aware of my intentions in coming here. Return the sailors to me, said Linley. Although he was using a calm tone, it was one that gave no room for negotiation. Lin Li's tone reminded Delano of how Lin Li requested the Fifth Fleet to return the star the last time. It was the same tone that brought the Fifth Fleet to destruction after Delano rejected his request. The memory triggered Delano's rage, and he started to smirk. Are you thinking of turning this place into Helenaport? Feel free to do that if you have the guts. But let me remind you that this is the capital of the Gilded Kingdom, and you are standing in the camp of the Royal Guards. If you dare to do anything here, it is akin to declaring a war on the Gilded Kingdom. The middle-aged general next to Delano was initially as frightened as the latter, but Delano's reminder gave him all the courage to speak up. President Flick, let me introduce myself. I am the General of the Royal Guards, Kate. Your men had been charged with the crime of assaulting Prince Vincent. They have violated the laws of the Gilded Kingdom. We have eyewitnesses and concrete evidence. Your sailors have to face the kingdom's trial. If you bring your men away now, I can forgive you for destroying the compounds of the camp. If not, I will hold you accountable as intruders. General Kate's words sent a few other royal guards out to defend their entrance. Although they were all trembling, they readied themselves for an imminent battle. Of course, they were all more trusting of Kate's words. They believed that the people from the breezy plains would not dare to take action so recklessly. Flick, stop thinking so wishfully. Don't you know that your sailors have committed the felony of assaulting Prince Vincent? They won't be able to leave this place alive, remarked Delano, gloating. The last time, he did not expect the star to have a time-lapse crystal ball, and that caused him to fail in his plot against the tower. This time, he was certain that they would not have any evidence to turn the situation over. It was definitely a real prince that was beaten by the sailors. Linley shook his head gently when he heard Delano's words. Bring them out, he said very straightforwardly. He was too lazy to reason with such a man. What are you talking about? Did the cursed land make you deaf? Let me tell you that your people are doomed. Delano snapped arrogantly, thinking that Linley was talking to him. However, Delano and Kate would not have imagined that Lin Li's words were actually directed at his own men. After hearing Lin Li's order, the mages from the team charged into the camp without hesitation. Although the royal guards were elites of the Gilded Kingdom, they were no different from ants before the legendary mages from the Tower of Dusk. Fortunately, the mages from the Tower of Dusk were not as inhumane as Garl, the Lord Devourer. Although they cast spells to deter the royal guards, they did not aim to kill. Of course, even so, their powers were enough to cause great pain to them. A small air bomb was enough to send a dozen guards flying like bowling pins. In the blink of an eye, the group of soldiers was cleared from the path. None of them remained standing. The surroundings were filled with their groans of pain. Of course, this meant that they were still alive, and thus luckier than the people from the Fifth Fleet. Kate and Delano could not help but start to stumble backward as the team of mages closed the distance between them. Why would you dare to do this? Lawless. This is lawless. Are you declaring war on the kingdom? Snapped General Kate in anger. Delano became a little hysterical. One would possibly not know if that hysteria was caused by fear. Flick, how could you dare to do this? You are doomed. You are inviting disaster to the breezy plains. You are declaring a war. However, Lin Li's expression stayed the same. Hurry, go find them now, he ordered. Yes, Mr. President, replied the mages from the team. They threw away their initial hesitation and charged towards the gates of the camp. Although Kate was at the peak of the legendary realm, he only had the guts to put up a brave front before the team of legendary mage from the Tower of Dusk. He quickly pulled Delano to the side when he saw the legendary mage charging over. Good guts. Why don't you tear down this place today? I'm excited to see who will be the last to cry, hollered Kate with the same demeanor. Originally, the mages from the Tower of Dusk only intended to end their work after finding the sailors. Kate's words triggered their anger, and they decided to satisfy the commander's wishes. They were no longer as reserved as before. Magic sparks started to fly and sounds of explosions erupted within the camp of the royal guards. What followed was the noises of buildings collapsing. One could see a piece of flat ground if he were standing at the entrance. Kate's blood started to boil at the sight. He pointed at Linley with his trembling finger, but remained beyond words. His speechlessness was caused by two things. First, rage. Second, fear. He was afraid that saying more would invite more destruction. He now understood that the president from the Tower of Dusk was not only an unreasonable man, but also one who would not consider the consequences of his actions. Unlike Kate, Delano had a completely different reaction. He did not care whether the guards were dead or alive, let alone the damage they would suffer. He only hoped this issue could be made as big as possible, until the breezy plains and Gilded Kingdom turned against each other. To him, His position was definitely reasonable this time round, and the kingdom would definitely not do anything to him. Soon, the mages from the Tower of Dusk found the sailors who were detained in the cells. It was great as all they suffered were little cuts and bruises, and had not yet been subjected to torture. No matter how much Delano hated Linley, it did not make sense for him to treat the sailors like how he wished to treat Linley. The sailors were doomed according to the laws of the kingdom anyway. The sailors had the same thought as Delano, yet they didn't expect Linley, who had been rumored to have died at the cursed land, to return and create such a huge racket just to rescue them. Hence, all of them started sobbing in great gratitude when they saw Linley. Seeing that the sailors were not seriously injured, Linley felt that there wasn't a need to seek any more trouble at the royal guards. Hence, he ordered his men to pack up and was ready to bring everyone back to the embassy. Halt. General Kate plucked up the courage to chase out. President Flick, have you considered the consequences of waging a war with the Gilded Kingdom over these few sailors? Said Kate as he pointed at Linley exasperatedly. Whatever, responded Linley indifferently. He did not even care to turn his head towards Kate in response before leading his men back to the embassy. The sight of their departure made Kate tremble in rage. He really wanted to gather all his troops and arrest all of them. However, even though he was really furious, he was aware that that sanctuary powerhouse from the Tower of Dusk was the one who'd brought the Fifth Fleet to its downfall. He knew that his people would definitely be an insignificant force against the tower. Delano walked up to General Kate with an expression that showed deep hatred. General Kate, isn't this clear disregard for the Gilded Kingdom? We have to inform the king about this, and let his majesty see their true colors, said Delano through his gritted teeth. Yes. It's time to let this bunch of darn fellas know that the Fifth Fleet is not the only trump card of the Gilded Kingdom, replied Kate as he clenched his fists. The hatred in his heart was comparable to Delano's when he gazed upon his pathetic campsite and groaning soldiers. Let's see who has their backing this time. In reality, there had not been any unified view within the Gilded Kingdom regarding how they should treat the people from the breezy plains. There was a group of peace supporters who believed in reaching out to the forces from the breezy plains peacefully and inviting them to enter a partnership before gradually acquiring each of those forces. There were also the military supporters, who believed that the military should just send their troops to the breezy plains and force these forces into submission. Bradler, the king of the Gilded Kingdom, was more inclined towards using peaceful means. Hence, that motivated him to extend his invitation to all of the forces from the breezy plains to encourage them to be part of their National Day celebration. He even sought the grandest way to welcome Linley. However, the kingdom's military had not given up on the idea of using force against the breezy plains. The generals believed that the only way to gain fame and glory was to clinch victories in their battles. In fact, they had been devising ways to convince King Bradler of this ever since Linley brought the Fifth Fleet to its downfall. However, Bradler chose the former option after weighing the pros and cons. That did not mean he was a weakling. It meant that he had chosen an option that was the best for the Gilded Kingdom. If that could not bring him towards his goals, he would definitely consider the second option. Although war was a violent method, one would need a valid reason to start a war. This was especially so for the Gilded Kingdom, which wanted to rule over the forces in the breezy plains. An important thing for the kingdom to do was to win the hearts of the people there. After all, they had suffered an unreasonable loss when the Tower of Dusk destroyed the Fifth Fleet. But, this time, it was a hard fact that the sailors from the Tower of Dusk had assaulted Prince Vincent. The Tower of Dusk also created a huge ruckus over these sailors in the military territory. Although the result was not as tragic as the Fifth Fleet's ending, the embarrassment was real. It was as if the Tower of Dusk had slapped the king's face and trampled the dignity of the Gilded Kingdom. Could there be any other behavior worse than this? Delano and Kate soon saw eye to eye with each other. Kate let the guards leave the aftermath of the commotion as evidence of the crime. Then, they sped off to the palace and spread the news to the supporters of the military. Moments later, Delano and Kate arrived at the gates of the palace. In order to avoid appearing too deliberate, they did not wait for the military supporters to arrive. After sending their plea to meet the king, they waited to be summoned into the palace. On their way to the king, the two men learned from the guards that King Bradler was in a meeting with his ministers, and those ministers were the key figures in support of peace. This information brought a smile to the two men and motivated them to accelerate their pace. These ministers had been arguably more powerful than the military when King Bradler decided to adopt a peaceful strategy. This time, Delano and Kate had enough confidence that they would be able to use their information to give these supporters of peace a tight slap. Before entering the discussion hall, they changed their expressions and displayed deep grief and great indignation. Then, they ran into the hall and knelt before King Bradler. "Your Majesty, please bring us justice. The people from the breezy plains are too outrageous," cried the two men. Hearing that, King Bradler, Minister Karen, and the rest of them looked at both of them puzzledly. What's with the two of you? Stand up to speak. Delano, didn't I let you stay at home? Why are you here with General Kate? Hollered King Bradler furiously, when he saw their lack of composure. Delano's excitement in making the complaint caused him to forget about the fact that he was still being punished by the king. Although his father was the high priest of the kingdom, it was the king who had the final say. Hence, he stood at his spot blankly, and was at a loss for words. Your Majesty, President Fulik from the Tower of Dusk is extremely lawless. He totally has no regard for the Gilded Kingdom, cried General Kate, the commander of the royal guards. He shifted the king's attention away from Delano. This time, it was his unit that suffered great losses. The agony underlying his tone was definitely not feigned. Bradler frowned when he heard Kate's words. Instead of asking him what happened, Bradler asked, did you mean President Fulik has come back from the land of curses? In fact, Bradler and the other ministers were in a discussion about the news of Lin Li's death that was sent back by High Priest Power. They were thinking if they should keep to their original strategy to acquire the breezy plains peacefully if the Tower of Dusk wouldn't be able to return from the cursed island. The kingdom's greatest concern about the breezy plains was the power of the Tower of Dusk, especially their president in the sanctuary realm. Sanctuary powerhouses were not to be trifled with. Even if the Gilded Kingdom had the ability to suppress one sanctuary powerhouse, they would definitely pay a hefty price for it. Moreover, Linley was not only the president of Tower of Dusk, but also the fourth arbitrator of the Supreme Council. Things would definitely become very serious if the Supreme Council were to be involved. Yet things would be different without Linley. While there was still the Ashen Warlock in the breezy plains, he might not want to have a direct confrontation with the Gilded Kingdom. After all, the Ashen Warlock advocated for peace in the breezy plains. The Gilded Kingdom had confidence that they would be able to acquire the breezy plains without creating too great of a racket. Hence, Bradler already had thoughts to change his initial strategy. Of course, the prerequisite was to be absolutely certain that Linley would never return. Otherwise, they would be caught in a sticky mess. Kate froze when he heard the king's response. Yet, his rage made him react to it very shortly afterwards. Yes, Your Highness. It is that Fulik from the Tower of Dusk who created trouble for us. At the campsite upon his return, he not only snatched our prisoners, but also injured numerous soldiers. He razed our camp flat. What? This actually happened, gasped King Bradler and the other ministers, when they heard Kate's story. They thought they had heard it wrongly. Just when they were flabbergasted, and did not know how to respond to Kate's sharing, a few men walked into the discussion hall. The one that led the group was one of the two main ministers of Gilded Kingdom, Burgess. Burgess was the representative of the military supporters, and his son was Cantori, the proud and capable disciple of the Illuminati. Lawless. Simply lawless, Burgess hollered as he entered the hall angrily. He only bowed respectfully at King Bradler when he got closer to him. Your Majesty, please pardon me for coming in without seeking permission. It was all because of that unreasonable Fulik. His disregard for the Gilded Kingdom is unacceptable. Oh, could you be here for the same reason as Kate? Tell me more about it, responded Bradler. While he trusted General Kate, he could not help but feel skeptical when he heard his story. It was the involvement of Delano that made him doubt if the story had been exaggerated. Bradler stole a look at Delano and Kate and placed his gaze back on King Bradler. Your Majesty, the entire kingdom is talking about it. It's the greatest shame our kingdom has experienced in a few thousand years, he said gravely. Master Burgess, please do not jump to conclusions so hastily. Our Majesty needs to know the details of the matter before he is able to make a decision, snapped Karen, the minister who supported the peaceful acquisition of the breezy plains. He was definitely triggered by Burgess' provocative words. Karen and Burgess were two key ministers of the Gilded Kingdom, who had comparable power and status. However, Burgess had a capable son, who was chosen by the Illuminati as a disciple to be groomed as a potential candidate for their successor. This lifted Karen's status, and made his words weigh more than Burgess. This time, King Bradler had selected to use the opinions of the peace supporters in their plans to reach into the breezy plains. As he was the representative of the peaceful supporters, it was a rare opportunity for Karen's words to weigh more than Bradler. Because of this, Karen was really motivated to keep the king on his side. Furthermore, what Burgess had said was definitely exaggerated. What did he mean when he said, a few thousand years? The Gilded Kingdom has been around for a few thousand years, and has experienced the worst. The kingdom nearly got wiped out from the endless ocean when the ancient Wyrm descended. What could be worse than that catastrophe? Burgess snorted coldly upon hearing Karen. Karen, you were the one who advocated for a peaceful relationship with the breezy plains. You even invited them to our National Day celebration. The kingdom cut no slack in offering them the best experience and time here. Yet, I think this has made them think that the kingdom was afraid of them. Their actions have become more and more relentless. Our Majesty forgave them for the Fifth Fleet incident very generously, and they did not have the slightest sense of guilt. This time, they even had the audacity to raise our military region to the ground. If this is not trampling the honor of our kingdom, I don't know what else is. Seeing that Burgess and Karen were about to enter into an argument, King Bradler slammed the armrest of his throne. "Stop fighting, Burgess. What did you say about the military grounds?" he said gravely. "Your Majesty, since General Kate is here, I think it would be more appropriate for him to share about it," replied Burgess after he saw that they had created enough tension. "Your Majesty, a few days ago, we arrested a few sailors who assaulted Prince Vincent at Helena Port. After interrogation, we discovered that they were the employees of the Tower of Dusk serving on the Star. They were left behind by the organization when the latter left the harbor. As it is a grave crime to attack royalty, we locked them in our cells to await their sentencing," explained Kate. He paused and stole a glance at King Bradler. Although this matter was not a plot that was conspired by Delano previously, and had evidence and eyewitnesses and the personal testimony from Prince Vincent, it did not mean that it was really impeccable. They might discover something new if they were to choose to dive deeper into the investigation. After all, it was a case that consisted of a noble prince and a few lowly sailors. The appearance of both parties just invited doubt. However, King Bradler's main concern was clearly not about the case, but the situation at the military grounds. Hence, he frowned and commanded Kate to continue his story. Bradler's words assuaged General Kate's anxiety a little. He caught on to Bradler's curiosity and continued his speech with great spirit and grief. "Today, President Fulik from the Tower of Dusk suddenly returned and came to ask for the sailors. To honor the dignity of our kingdom, I tried to use reason to persuade him otherwise. Yet, he proceeded to order his men to barge into our grounds to bring the criminals out. He even let his men injure numerous of our soldiers and raze our territory to the ground." Kate's comments led to an uproar in the discussion hall. The generals who were military supporters acted exaggeratedly, as though it was their first time hearing the news. The generals who supported peace all had looks of disbelief. The most important matter was not what had happened to the military compound, but the fact that Fulik had wreaked havoc in the capital of the Gilded Kingdom. Anything that happened here had a direct impact on the reputation of the kingdom, and it would be unforgivable for any kingdom to have their dignity trampled by any party. Hence, King Bradler frowned after he heard Kate's story. "Are you speaking the truth?" asked Bradler sternly. "Your Majesty, I swear to God that I speak of no lie." "You could head over to our site now to speak to the soldiers, and look at the ruins there," replied Kate without a hint of hesitation. "Your Majesty, that Fulik is going too overboard. He has returned our great hospitality with such atrocities. If this were to continue, what would happen to the glory of our kingdom?" added Burgess hurriedly, when he saw Bradler descending deep in thought. The military generals stood up to back Burgess up indignantly. "Your Majesty, we will just need one word from you. As long as we dealt with Fulik and the people from the Breezy Plains, we would definitely be able to acquire the Breezy Plains." Karen grew anxious when he saw the military faction requesting for a war. "Your Highness, although President Fulik seems to be going a little overboard, it is too hasty to declare war because of it," Karen voiced out hurriedly. "Hasty? Our kingdom's reputation and honor is being trampled now. How could you say that it is too hasty, when all we want to do is to maintain the kingdom's dignity? Are you only going to take action to resist them when they charge into this palace?" retorted Burgess angrily and righteously. As King Bradler had been adopting the suggestions of the supporters of peace, he gave a lot of weight and recognition to their words. Hence, Burgess had been suppressing his anger for quite some time. The talk of honor was only a fade. As long as the Gilded Kingdom entered a war with the Breezy Plains, Burgess would be able to overwrite Karen's influence and acquire all the power and benefits for being recognized by the king. Since Karen's status was comparable to Burgess, there was nothing for him to fear. However, he did not immediately shoot Burgess' words down, for he knew that it might make him seem like he had no regard for the kingdom's honor. Hence, he was full of indignation as well. "Your Majesty, I feel deeply saddened by this situation as well, but we might be gambling on the future of our kingdom if we were to react so impulsively," persuaded Karen. "Gamble? Are you saying that we are gambling, when what we want to do is to fight for the honor of our kingdom?" snapped Burgess as he started to make a fuss after catching Karen's dubious choice of words. Karen, however, was unaffected. "Burgess, I can understand your fury, but have you wondered who has to pay the greatest price if we were to declare war on the Breezy Plains? That Fulik is a solid sanctuary powerhouse, and his Tower of Dusk even owns a war treasure like the Sky Castle. Have you thought about the consequences for our side even if we were to win the war?" King Bradler's rationale for a peaceful approach was due to his fear of the abilities of the Tower of Dusk. Hence, when he heard the rumor that Lin Li would never be back from the cursed land, he immediately gathered his ministers to discuss if they should make any modification to their strategy. Now that Linley had returned with full strength, Bradler naturally knew that he had to raise the same concerns. Sure enough, Bradler's expression became visibly hesitant when he heard Karen mention the power the Tower of Dusk had. Sanctuary powerhouses were not to be trifled with. If the Gilded Kingdom did not have sufficient abilities to counter the potential losses, their war would only bring everyone to the abyss. The fall of their proudest and greatest Fifth Fleet could only show that it was nothing before a sanctuary powerhouse. However, Burgess seemed to have come prepared with his piece as well. Did Master Karen forget that we are not battling by ourselves and have the support from the Illuminati? They would naturally help us get rid of Fulik and the Tower of Dusk. Are you insinuating that the Almighty Lord and the 4 sanctuary-level saints of the Illuminati have no ability to deal with Fulik? How can you then be sure that the Illuminati would have the ability to help us deal with Fulik? Do not forget that Fulik is also the 4th arbitrator of the Supreme Council. Illuminati would never risk entering a war with the Supreme Council to help us deal with Fulik and the Tower of Dusk. That is not something you can decide, said Karen as he brought out the Illuminati to counter Burgess' narrative. The only person who could make the decision for the Illuminati was their lord. Were they going to bring this proposal to him now? Mr. Minister, are you then saying that we should let people ride on our heads? Even if you are willing, we aren't, the military supporters retorted furiously. Although they knew that Karen was speaking reasonably, they could not help but feel indignant. While their status was lower than Karen's, each of them had power and authority in the military. Naturally, they weren't scared of Karen, let alone watch their words when they were with him. Quiet down. What a racket, hollered Burgess pretentiously after he waited for the other generals to air their views. Your Majesty, we definitely should not ask the Lord of the Illuminati for their opinion right now. But my son is the disciple of the Lord, and his words could represent the views of the Illuminati. Why don't we ask him over? Said Burgess as he turned to King Bradler. What Bradler feared was Lin Li's abilities as a sanctuary-level powerhouse. If they could get help from the Illuminati, he wouldn't need to bother to look like he was an advocate of peace at all. Hence, he agreed to Burgess' proposal. All right, go ahead. Summon Cantori over, replied Bradler. Lin Li's problem cooked up a dispute between the 2 ideological camps within the kingdom. It even caused King Bradler's judgment to waver. All of this happened while Linley brought his men back to the embassy for the Tower of Dusk, as if nothing concerned him. The representatives from the breezy plains did not return to their respective embassies immediately. They followed the group to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk. All of them had felt the clear difference in the treatment they received from the Gilded Kingdom when Linley left to explore the Cursed Island. They were definitely well aware of the reason. They did not have the backing of sanctuary powerhouses. While the Mithril Alliance and Caesar family had sanctuary powerhouses, they could tell that it was only FADE, and no one from the Gilded Kingdom ever saw them as a threat to real sanctuary powerhouses. People in the legendary realm were no different from ants. There wouldn't be any threat even if there were 1,000 of them, but beginner sanctuary powerhouses were not the same. They were not too far away from peak legendary powerhouses, and the number of legendary powerhouses still mattered to them. Dozens of legendary powerhouses were enough to challenge beginner sanctuary powerhouses. Moreover, the Gilded Kingdom seemed to have the support from a powerful force like the Illuminati, whose might was comparable to the Supreme Council's. These forces were not short of real sanctuary powerhouses. Before them, beginner sanctuary powerhouses and legendary powerhouses were definitely at a disadvantage. Therefore, Lin Li's return reassured the people from the breezy plains, and they saw him as someone they could depend on. They followed closely after Lin Li's group for 2 reasons. First, to show their allegiance to Lin Li, and second, to hear from Lin Li regarding his next steps. Although Lin Li did not seem to care, they believed that his actions had definitely provoked the Gilded Kingdom. Hence, some of them hastily reached out to Lin Li the moment they entered the embassy. President Fulik, you might have been a little too impulsive in this matter. That was the military grounds, and we are in the capital of the Gilded Kingdom. We're afraid that the Gilded Kingdom might use that reason against all of us. While the Gilded Kingdom did not say much when Lin Li wiped out their precious 5th Fleet, things were different this time as it was the royal military grounds that were involved. There might not be a big deal if their camp were to be located in Helenaport. However, it wasn't. It was situated in the capital of the Gilded Kingdom. This changed the essence of the problem. While the military suffered minute losses, the kingdom suffered greatly in its reputation. However, Lin Li only gave a faint smile. He did not seem affected by the reaction of the Gilded Kingdom. He directed his attention to the sailors that he had just brought out of the cells. What exactly happened? Asked Lin Li. Although Lin Li was clear that this matter had to have been plotted by the Gilded Kingdom, or more specifically, Delano, he wasn't sure of all the details. He needed these sailors to share them with him. If the sailors were part of the problem, Lin Li would definitely not let them return to the star anymore. The several sailors had initially thought that they were going to be beheaded for their deed of assaulting the prince of the kingdom. They did not expect Lin Li to make such an effort to rescue their insignificant lives from the cells. The fact that they were able to look at the outside world again after escaping from death filled them with extreme ecstasy. However, they felt trepidation on the way back to the embassy. This was because they were aware that the situation had really grown beyond their scope. If there were to be a war between the Gilded Kingdom and the Breezy Plains just because of them, they knew they would become the sinners of the Breezy Plains. Of course, these sailors were not people who would want to sacrifice their lives to prevent a war from happening. This was what made them grow anxious. Now that they were freed, they certainly did not want to be sent back to the cells for the same reason. After all, they were only outsiders who were hired to operate the star. They did not have many interactions with Lin Li, and were not aware of the personality of this young sanctuary powerhouse. After hearing Lin Li's question, they knelt neatly before Linley with looks of guilt, and one of the more experienced sailors decided to volunteer to speak up. "Captain, this was what happened. We really did not know that darn Fatso was the prince of the Gilded Kingdom." As these men were the sailors of the star, they naturally addressed Linley as Captain instead of President. After hearing their side of the story, Linley quickly understood the details of the situation. He discovered that it was really a simple matter. A few sailors were drinking and having fun with the waitresses in the bar, and they met an extremely cocky fatso who wanted to book the place. The sailors started to make comments among themselves, as it was the first time they heard somebody book a bar. Yet, their comments were picked up by the fatso, and he flew into an outrage. Their bickering transformed into a physical fight, and the police rushed into the bar. They recognized the identity of that fatso, and arrested the sailors for assaulting the prince of the kingdom. Linley knew he guessed it right after he heard from the sailors. He saw through Delano's lame plot. Yet, it was a fact that those sailors had assaulted Prince Vincent. This made the cause of the fight secondary. It was unforgivable for commoners to assault any noble person in this world. After sharing their story, the sailors looked at Linley pitifully, and no one dared to utter a single word. These men had been left at Helena Port due to their lack of ability to embark on the precarious journey. It was evident that they could only make so little contribution to the Tower of Dusk and the Star. In the end, they not only did not render any help, but caused such a big trouble. If they had been their own captains, they wouldn't have tolerated themselves. However, these sailors were not sanctuary powerhouses, after all. None of them knew what was on Lin Li's mind. Lin Li's expression remained the same after hearing their story. He only gave them a gentle nod, and waved his hands to signal them to take a rest. He did not even tell them how he was going to deal with their behavior. "President Flick, no matter what the Gilded Kingdom intends to do, the Caesar family is definitely going to stand with the Tower of Dusk. If they want to use this as an excuse to declare war on us, let's let them know that the people of the Breezy Plains are not to be trifled with," said Claus from the Caesar family. After the sailors left the room, Claus could tell from Lin Li's treatment of the sailors that Lin Li absolutely would not give in to the Gilded Kingdom. Hence, he immediately made their stance clear. Since the Caesar family would never be able to withdraw from the conflict between the Gilded Kingdom and the Breezy Plains, he knew that he definitely had to take a side. Although it seemed like the Gilded Kingdom had greater power, as they had the backing of the Illuminati, Claus knew that he would immediately offend the Tower of Dusk if he were to choose to support the Gilded Kingdom. After all, the Caesar family was situated in the Breezy Plains, which was located far away from the Gilded Kingdom. Claus had a deep understanding of the power the Tower of Dusk had, not to mention that present in the Sanctuary realm, he knew that the Sky Castle was not something that the Caesar family could challenge. If the Tower of Dusk were to attack the Caesar family, the Gilded Kingdom would definitely not be able to send help to such a far place. Moreover, Claus was clear that his organization was not well looked upon by the Gilded Kingdom. He was sure that Caesar family was just a disposable force to the kingdom. Claus' worry was not invalid. Hence, he reasoned that it would be more beneficial if he were to pledge allegiance to the Tower of Dusk. He was certain that the Tower of Dusk did not have plans to rule the Breezy Plains. Unlike the Gilded Kingdom, there was nothing for the Caesar family to lose if they were to be an ally of the Tower of Dusk. And the representatives of the other forces present all had the same idea as Claus. All of them righteously declared their allegiance after Claus, as though they were ready to live and die with the Tower of Dusk. Of course, Linley was not unaware of what these people were thinking about, but there was no need for him to expose them, either. He patiently waited for most of them to say their piece before waving to gesture them to stop. "I am aware of all your intentions, but this matter is not as grave as you think it is, so if there is nothing else, you can return to your embassies," said Linley smilingly. Seeing that Linley was unaffected by the matter, the representatives from the Breezy Plains knew that there was nothing else for them to say, although they were also curious about the happenings on the Cursed Island. They knew it would be disrespectful to bug them for they had just returned from the long journey. Hence, they started to bid Lin Li goodbye. Only when the rest of the people from the breezy plains left did the vice captain of the team of mages, Doric, went up to Lin Li uneasily. "Mr. President, just now It was Doric who led the men to barge into the military grounds. He was also the one who ordered his people to turn the place into ruins. Hence, he was a little worried that he would invite trouble for his president and the Tower of Dusk." However, Linley stopped Doric with his hand as well. "Don't think too much about it, you're doing a good job. Since the Gilded Kingdom wanted to burn the bridges, there is no need for us to show them any respect, either," said Linley. Linley had come to Anril a few years ago, and had seen enough of this world. It was a place that reflected the survival of the fittest. People with power had the right to disregard rules. No one would blame them as long as they had a harder fist. In fact, this was the same for one's progression in abilities. Before reaching the legendary realm, everyone had to adhere to the laws of the world. At the legendary realm, people started to comprehend and use the laws, and at the sanctuary realm, they started to master and change them before ascending to divinity. Hence, rules were meant to be broken by people with power. According to the laws of the Gilded Kingdom, the sailors would be given a death penalty for assaulting their prince. However, Linley's fist was large enough to rescue them from the cells. While it was akin to giving the kingdom a humiliating slap on their face, when Linley's mages raised the military territory into flat ground, Linley's large fist would render the Gilded Kingdom helpless. Although Linley was not a person who liked to abuse his power, he was never one who would offer his right cheek after he got a slap on his left. Although it seemed like Lin Li had gone considerably overboard in this matter to the rest of the people, Lin Li was extremely clear that he wouldn't have been able to rescue his sailors had he gone through the supposedly legitimate channels. Lin Li could totally imagine how long the Gilded Kingdom would have tried to delay in returning him his men if he had picked the civilized way. He might even put their lives at stake if the kingdom had decided to execute them before he learned of it. This would be another slap on Lin Li's face. After sending Doric and the others away, Lin Li returned to his room and took out the blueprint of the Mageth of the Seven Monuments to study it. He did not want to delay any longer. He was totally not affected by the Gilded Kingdom's possible retaliation. He was prepared that there might be a war, and thought that there would not be a need for him to waste his time thinking about it. The Mageth on the monuments was a divine-level Mageth. Although he had gained a little understanding of it in the underworld, it was too insignificant. Yet, that did not mean that it did not have any use in solving the mystery. It was just like one of the ends of a tangled string. As long as he started with this end of the string, he was certain that time was all he needed to unravel the mystery. However, time was a huge problem for Lin Li too. Even though he had a way to distort the laws of time, he couldn't use that solution often. When he was in the underground world, he was also forced by High Priest Power, who left him with no choice but to distort the laws of time to buy time for himself. Within less than a second, Lin Li paid a huge price, and that was if his strength could no longer improve. His life expectancy would become hundreds of years shorter than the other sanctuary powerhouses due to the distortion of the laws of time. Although it was said that sanctuary powerhouses had infinite lifespan, it was actually just an exaggeration because no one could live forever. Even gods and deities would fall, let alone the sanctuary powerhouses, who had yet to break free from the restraint of world laws. Besides, if he kept using that method to distort the laws of time, the price to pay in the long run would be far beyond just having his lifespan shortened. His soul and mental strength might be damaged, and in serious cases, he might lose all hopes of achieving godhood. Hence, even with the ability to distort the laws of time, Lin Li did not dare to use it indiscriminately. He had no choice but to study the Mageth properly. Actually, there was a Mageth array in the Tower of Dusk that could form the time domain, which many of the mages of the Tower of Dusk had entered before. In there, they also mastered some magic spells and techniques. However, that time domain was effective only for mages below the legendary level. For sanctuary powerhouses like Lin Li, it wasn't very useful. The time domain that Lin Li used was mainly meant for nurturing herbs and magical beasts or catalyzing the potency of potions, etc. If the time domain had been useful for him too, he would have become an old man by now because he often stayed there to prepare potions. If there was a Mageth array that could generate a time domain that could distort the laws of time, like Lin Li had before, it could be considered to be at the Divine Smith level. At least, with Lin Li's current attainments and inscriptions, he still couldn't set up such a Mageth array. Perhaps when Lin Li comprehended 30% to 50% of the Divine Smith level Mageths on the monument, he might be able to set up such a powerful time domain. However, he was now far from being able to do that. However, even if Lin Li could not get a clear understanding of the Divine Smith level Mageth, he didn't gain anything during the process of studying it at all. Linley realized that studying it was akin to sitting for an inscription exam, as it required a large amount of knowledge in inscription, and it was almost like a summary of the knowledge he had acquired, be it in terms of pharmaceutics or inscription and skills of other progressions. Linley did not obtain his knowledge bit by bit. Instead, he had it instilled in his head after using the Scroll of Wishes in the game before transmigrating to this world. He had great theoretical knowledge, but when it came to practical application, he was inevitably a little inflexible. That problem hadn't surfaced before, but it wasn't because he didn't have such a problem, but because the standards of professions in this world were too low. A master-level professional would be akin to standing at the top of the world, so what problems could Linley, a guru-level figure, possibly have to rack his brains to solve? As Linley had encountered a divine smith-level mageth, the issue of his lack of ability to apply his knowledge well was exposed. Studying the divine smith-level mageth was akin to giving a chance to truly transform the inscription knowledge that had been forcefully instilled in his mind into his own knowledge. Hence, although Linley was unable to study the divine smith-level mageth thoroughly, he was making progress in his inscription studies almost at every moment. After he had truly integrated all the knowledge, it would probably be a matter of time before he could crack the divine smith-level mageth. That was the reason that Linley soon became completely immersed in studying the divine smith-level mageth. At this moment, he had completely forgotten about everything else, as nothing was as attractive to him as the mageth. While Linley was immersed in the world of inscription knowledge, King Bradler and the ministers in the royal palace of the Gilded Kingdom also met Cantori, Burge's son. Although the ministers who were now present in the royal palace's council hall were all important to the kingdom, and were also Cantori's elders, they were all respectful towards Cantori. None of them dared to look at him with contempt or treat him as a junior. Cantori was the disciple of the Illuminatus Lord, and there was a high possibility that he would succeed this position. Hence, Cantori's current status was probably on par with that of his father, Chancellor Burgess. Moreover, if Cantori really became a saint of the Illuminati in the future, even King Bradler would have to bow respectfully while greeting him. However, even with such a status, Cantori didn't seem too arrogant. He strode towards King Bradler and bowed respectfully to him as a junior. Seeing Cantori's performance, Bradler nodded slightly with some satisfaction. Cantori had obtained such a high status at such a young age. If anyone else were in his place, they would probably be extremely arrogant and conceited. For example, High Priest Power's son Delano, who was about the same age as Cantori. Yet, there was such a huge difference between them. Bradler raised his hand to gesture for Cantori to spare the formalities and take a seat beside his father, Burgess. He then asked in a gentle tone, "Cantori, you should know why I asked you to come here. In this case, I'd like to hear your opinion on this matter." There shouldn't be a feud between Cantori and Lin Li, but there was definitely some hatred. Back in the breezy plains, Cantori had suffered huge losses because of Lin, especially when they went to the Tower of Dusk to ask Linley for help because of the incident on Cage Island. For Cantori, that experience could be considered the most humiliating one in his life. Hence, deep down, Cantori felt a strong urge to start a war with the Tower of Dusk, and then use the power of the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati to destroy the Tower of Dusk and Linley to vent his anger. However, when he heard Bradler asking him for his opinion, he did not directly say that he wanted to go to war with the Tower of Dusk, because that would seem too crude and direct. Cantori did not answer immediately, and instead lowered his head and thought for a while, as if he was carefully considering the trade-offs. Bradler, who was seated high on the throne, naturally admired him for doing so. Cantori was young and talented, but not overly impatient. He was probably the best candidate for a successor in Bradler's opinion. Unfortunately, he was not his son. After pondering for a moment, Cantori raised his head and said to Bradler, "Your Majesty, I have indeed also understood the details of this matter. When I was on the mission to the breezy plains, I experienced the brutal and overbearing nature of President Flick, but I didn't hold it against him at that time for the sake of the greater good. However, this matter concerns the dignity of the Gilded Kingdom. If we don't express our stand, the Gilded Kingdom might really become a laughingstock." What Cantori said was precisely the reason that others wanted to persuade King Bradler to go to war. Hence, those who were in support of war were smiling, while the ministers who supported peace had sullen expressions. On the other hand, Bradler frowned slightly and said to Cantori, "Does this mean that you also agree to go to war with the Tower of Dusk and Breezy Plains?" However, after hearing Bradler's words, Cantori shook his head slightly and said, "Your Majesty, once the war starts, it will be tantamount to us being tied to a carriage with a horse that has lost its mind. We won't stop until the very end. There might be a straight road ahead or a cliff, but no matter what, we must go on. So, Going to war can only be used as a last resort. Besides, not everything can be solved by going to war. As soon as they heard Cantori's words, Burgess and others who were in support of the war suddenly had a change of expression. No matter how they deciphered it, it didn't seem that Cantori supported the idea of going to war with the breezy plains. Those who supported peace also nodded one after another, as if Cantori said what was on their minds. However, Bradler was really confused as to whether Cantori wanted to go to war or not. Hence, after being stunned for a while, he slowly asked, "So, Cantori, what do you think about this matter?" Smugness flashed in Cantori's eyes. In an earnest tone and with a humble expression, he soon said, "Your Majesty, I think we should give President Fulik a chance to redeem himself before deciding whether to go to war with the Tower of Dusk. If President Fulik is willing to publicly apologize to our kingdom for this matter, and hand over the people who attacked Prince Vincent, as well as the people who made a scene at the barracks of the Royal Guards, we can get along with him peacefully." Hearing the idea that Cantori had come up with, Bradler couldn't help but have his eyes light up. Previously, he had been confused because of the two sides that supported different things, and Cantori's suggestion was a good way to save some pride for the kingdom while also avoiding a war. However, Bradler asked one more question. What if President Fulik refuses to apologize or hand over those people? If that happens, there's nothing we can do, because we're already being as kind as we can. I believe teacher will not tolerate someone insulting the kingdom. Cantori spoke with confidence, as if he was certain that he would be able to convince the Illuminati. After Cantori said those words, those who were in support of starting a war were immediately speechless. The Gilded Kingdom had suffered a huge loss, and they felt that making the president of the Tower of Dusk apologize was not a big deal. It would be overboard if he didn't apologize at all. Although Minister Karen felt that there was something amiss with the situation, there was nothing he could say. After all, as the Chancellor of the kingdom, Karen couldn't put the dignity of the kingdom at risk even if he insisted on his own political views. The camp that was in support of the war, which was led by Burgess, was full of bewilderment, and it was as if he couldn't understand how Cantori could come up with such an idea. From Cantori's point of view, it seemed to be a way to prevent a war from breaking out, as they could avoid war as long as the Tower of Dusk apologized. If they didn't go to war in the breezy plains, it wouldn't be a good thing for the camp that was in support of the war. Not to mention the military generals, even Cantori's father, Burgess, seemed to be puzzled about his son's decision. He was aware that Cantori was definitely in support of a war, but the latter gave such a suggestion just as Bradler was about to be convinced. However, at this point, it seemed to be too late to say anything, as Bradler agreed very much with Cantori's idea. Hence, he immediately called the Foreign Affairs Minister Jefferson to come over. However, it was already very late. Hence, he asked Jefferson to go to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk early tomorrow morning and bring the troublesome President Fulik over. The Foreign Affairs Minister Jefferson was in support of peace. Hence, after hearing the king's order, he knew that the king was not going to start a war immediately, which made him feel a sense of relief. He even found Cantori to be extraordinarily lovely today. In order to avoid having those who were in support of war say anything, he left the conference hall immediately after receiving the orders. After Jefferson's departure, the people in the council hall didn't have much to discuss, as they were all just waiting for tomorrow to arrive so that they could see how the Tower of Dusk would arrive. Bradler asked the ministers to return to get some rest. Of course, while resting, they also had to deal with compensation. After all, the Royal Guards barracks had been demolished, and it couldn't be resolved with just an apology. They had to ask for compensation. The ministers of the two camps immediately split into two distinct sides as soon as they left the council hall. They were each discussing something. At this point, Burgess couldn't tolerate it any longer as he looked at Cantori in displeasure, and said, "How could you come up with such an idea? This matter was initially a great opportunity for us to persuade His Majesty, but it's now gone because of what you said." Although the ministers around Burgess couldn't confront Cantori, they looked rather angered too. In their opinion, what Cantori did was akin to betrayal, as he had made them lose the military credit that they were about to get. However, in the face of his father's rebuke and the furious glares of the other ministers, Cantori merely smiled confidently and said, "Father, don't worry. I've been in the breezy plains for such a long time and gotten a good understanding of Fulik. Making him apologize to us is a Herculean task, let alone making him hand over his subordinates. Since he could stir up such a huge ruckus at our guards barracks for the sake of his sailors, how can he be willing to hand over his subordinates?" "You mean Fulik will never accept our conditions no matter what?" Burgess asked, looking at his son, seemingly deep in thought. "If that's the case, negotiating with him is redundant. We can just go to war," exclaimed Delano, who had come over at some point in time. After hearing Cantori's words, he was still quite puzzled, and couldn't help but speak up. If Delano was the only one who asked. Cantori really wouldn't bother to explain, but he saw that several other military generals also seemed bewildered by his decision. Hence, he shook his head and said, "We've already made such a huge compromise. If Fulik still doesn't appreciate it and reciprocate, what excuses can those few who are in support of peace come up with?" Hearing Cantori's explanation, the surrounding crowd came to a sudden realization, and all looked at Cantori with their eyes full of admiration. Someone almost stood out and praised him for his intelligent approach. They then looked at those few who were in support of peace, with contemptuous and disdainful gazes, as if they had already tricked the peace supporters. In fact, the peace supporters were still rather optimistic about it. In their opinion, they could avoid a war by asking the Tower of Dusk to apologize and compensate them while making Lin Li hand over his subordinates. They thought that Lin Li definitely wouldn't turn them down. Hence, the main focus of their discussion now revolved around compensation. They were also thinking of a solution that would protect the kingdom's pride, while also ensuring that the Tower of Dusk wouldn't reject it. After receiving King Bradler's order, Jefferson, the Foreign Affairs Minister of the Gilded Kingdom, headed straight to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk early the next morning with a few subordinates. However, on the way, he also secretly instructed his subordinates not to speak up after meeting the members of the Tower of Dusk, and to follow his arrangements. The subordinates naturally did not dare to oppose. Anyway, Jefferson would be there to protect them, and it was just making a trip there. The Gilded Kingdom's palace was near the embassy. Soon, Jefferson led them to the Tower of Dusk's embassy. There were two people standing in front of the embassy gate, both dressed in the mage robes of the Tower of Dusk. The Gilded Kingdom had originally arranged for soldiers to guard the entrance. However, Linley suddenly left with some people, and when he returned, the guards had already been chased away long ago. Jefferson walked to the embassy gate with a formal smile on his face. He said to the two mages in front of the gate, "Hello, I am Jefferson, the Foreign Affairs Minister of the Gilded Kingdom, and I'm no stranger to President Fulik, either. I have an urgent matter to see him for now, please inform him." Normally, Jefferson wouldn't be that polite to the two gatekeepers, but when he got closer, he realized that the two mages who were merely guarding the gate were at the legendary level. Although there was still the sanctuary realm, legendary mages were already like godlike existences in the eyes of ordinary people. Although Jefferson would not be defeated by two legendary mages still had a high status in the Gilded Kingdom. Legendary powerhouses were legendary powerhouses, after all. Even if they were just watching the gate, they were not to be belittled. The two mages from the Tower of Dusk looked at Jefferson and the others, but they did not make things hard for them. One of them nodded and said, "Okay, I'll go and see if President Fulik has the time to meet you or not." After saying that, he turned around and walked into the embassy. Before Jefferson could say anything, a young diplomatic official behind him could not contain his displeasure about their attitude anymore, and took a step forward. He said, "We're here to solve the problem sincerely, but you're making us wait outside the gate. Is this the attitude you should have when solving a problem?" Before the remaining mage of the Tower of Dusk could answer after hearing the words of the young diplomatic official, Jefferson flew into a rage, and pulled him over to give him a tight slap on his face. He cursed, "What did I tell you before we came? Who allowed you to say those words?" Although the members of the Gilded Kingdom seemed to be righteous, the peace supporters including Jefferson all needed the Tower of Dusk's help. If Linley agreed to the Gilded Kingdom's demands, the peace supporters would continue to maintain their political stand. Otherwise, the war supporters would suppress them. Hence, Jefferson now stooped low mainly because he was worried that he might anger the people of the Tower of Dusk. On the contrary, the mage of the Tower of Dusk seemed to be unable to tolerate it any longer as he stood out to persuade. "Lord Jefferson, don't get physical, young people are insensible. Just chide him a little." Hearing these words, the subordinates behind Jefferson couldn't help but roll their eyes. They could all see clearly that the mage of the Tower of Dusk who was talking was much younger than the official who got slapped. At this moment, the mage who went in to inform them walked out, and said to Jefferson, "You're lucky that President Fulik happens to be free. Come with me." "I'm lucky." "Ha, what's going on?" "We've been arguing for a day, but the Tower of Dusk seems to be completely uninvolved." Jefferson smiled bitterly. Jefferson took a step towards the embassy, and a few of his subordinates rushed to follow him, but they were stopped by the mage at the gate. The young man was about to argue, but after sensing it, Jefferson turned around and told his subordinates to wait at the gate. In fact, since the young official intervened, he no longer dared to bring them to see Linley for fear that someone from the war-supporting camp would deliberately try to stir trouble. Under the lead of the mage of the Tower of Dusk, Jefferson soon met Linley, but he was shocked by Linley's appearance. At this moment, Linley still looked rather fatigued and haggard, as if he hadn't slept for a few days and nights. Seeing Linley's appearance, Jefferson suddenly felt more at ease. In his opinion, The reason why Linley looked like this had to be because he had been fretting about the serious consequences of making a scene at the guards' barracks, and was worried about going to war with the Gilded Kingdom. He thought that his heart had to be in turmoil, hence, he looked at haggard. President Flick, you don't seem to be well. Are you facing any health problems lately? Jefferson asked, pretending to be concerned. Linley raised his hand and asked Jefferson to sit down. He then shook his head listlessly and said, "Thanks for your concern. It's nothing serious." Hearing Linley's answer, Jefferson sneered in his head. Despite being a sanctuary powerhouse, he's actually so worried. Fancy him saying that it's nothing serious. Of course, he could not say it directly. Instead, he tactfully said, "President Flick, I came here this time to solve your worries." Once he heard Jefferson's words, Linley immediately looked extremely surprised, and he scanned Jefferson from head to toe before saying with great suspicion, "What did you say, Lord Jefferson? Please clear my doubts." After Linley had rescued those sailors yesterday, he had been staying in his room to study the Divine Smith level Magath. If it were something else, Linley probably wouldn't feel that exhausted even after a month without sleep. However, the Magath of the Divine Smith level had depleted a huge amount of his energy after just a night of studying, even though it seemed easy to study. Although Linley was a sanctuary powerhouse, the Divine Smith level Magath had already reached the level of the gods, and it was like an ant trying to lift an elephant. The knowledge contained in the Divine Smith level Magath was like a massive elephant, while that in Linley's head was like an ant. They were simply worlds apart. The problem in Linley's mind was the Magath of the Divine Smith level. Hence, when he heard Jefferson's words, he was a little surprised, and he thought, could it be that the Foreign Affairs Minister of the Gilded Kingdom is also a Divine Smith level inscription master? However, Linley soon snapped back to his senses, and thought that Jefferson clearly wasn't a divine smith. Be it in inscription or other professions, one would be a true god once they reached the level of the divine smith. Even though they might not be strong before becoming a divine smith, the strength they possessed would definitely not be weaker than an ordinary god's. However, Linley did not sense a single trace of godly aura from Jefferson, and he merely felt a level 19 mana fluctuation. After reacting, Linley couldn't help but shake his head. It seemed that he had been driven mad by the Divine Smith level Magath, so much so that he actually developed that thought. He adjusted his mood a little, and said, "Lord Jefferson, we'd better talk about what you're here for. My problems can't be solved by you." Jefferson naturally could not imagine that Linley was actually vexed about a Divine Smith level Magath, so he decided to continue making assumptions based on his own guesses. He smiled ambiguously, and said, "President Flick, it's wrong of you to say that. Some things cannot be decided based on personal strength, so I might have a solution for the difficult issue that you're facing." Damn it, the more you say it, the more it seems like it. You're just here to pretend, huh? Or do you really have a way to solve the Divine Smith level Magath? Linley simply stood up, walked towards Jefferson, and said, "Okay, since you're so confident, come with me to examine the Divine Smith level Magath." When Jefferson saw how agitated Linley was at first, he thought that Linley was going to ask for his help to solve the conflict with the Gilded Kingdom this time. However, immediately after that, he heard Linley mentioning the Divine Smith level Magath, and the smile that had just appeared on his face suddenly stiffened. What? Divine Smith level Magath? Jefferson was a bit dumbfounded. He knew nothing about ordinary Magaths, let alone the Divine Smith level Magath. If he had that ability, he probably wouldn't have to take on the thankless job as a foreign affairs minister, even if he only had master level attainments. Yeah, I've been studying it for an entire night, but I still couldn't get a clear idea of what it is. I didn't expect you to be so knowledgeable, Lord Jefferson. You are actually confident about solving this issue for me. Please. Of course, Linley knew that Jefferson didn't have the ability to do that, but after studying for an entire night, he felt that he had to vent some of his frustration and anger. Hence, he deliberately tried to make things hard for Jefferson. Only now did Jefferson realize that Linley simply disregarded the major matter that he had mentioned to Linley because the latter was preoccupied with the Divine Smith level Magath. With a bitter smile, he said, "President Flick, pardon me for not making things clear enough. I'm here this time under the orders of the king to ask you to go to the palace to discuss something, not to study a Magath." "Oh, I see." Linley finally returned to his seat and looked at Jefferson. He calmly said, "Is your king planning to apologize to me for what they've done to my sailors?" "That's unnecessary. I still have other important things to handle, so I can't be bothered to hold it against you guys regarding that matter. Just make sure not to create trouble for nothing in the future. Luckily, I'm the one who came. If it was His Majesty or the other officials that are in support of the war, they would probably go to war with the Tower of Dusk." Jefferson almost vomited blood after hearing Linley's words. "President Flick, what you did yesterday is very unacceptable for the Gilded Kingdom. If this had happened anywhere else, we might have been able to compromise, but this concerns the pride and dignity of the Gilded Kingdom, since it happened in our capital. So, His Majesty would like you to go over to clear up this matter, and reach a consensus on a solution that can satisfy both of us. Seeing the way Lin Li was behaving, Jefferson knew that if he directly said that he wanted the Tower of Dusk to apologize and compensate, Lin Li definitely wouldn't give in. Hence, no matter what, he had to try to invite him to the palace before anything else. Hearing Jefferson finally explain his agenda for coming, Lin Li sized him up again before smiling ambiguously, and saying, "Okay, in that case, I'll go meet your king, and settle this matter quickly lest you keep bothering me." Seeing that Lin Li nodded and agreed, Jefferson immediately continued even though Lin Li's smile put him ill at ease. "Good that you think so, President Flick. In this case, let's head to the palace now lest His Majesty waits for too long." In fact, if Lin Li hadn't studied the mageths of the Divine Smith overnight, and caused his energy to be depleted, he wouldn't have bothered to waste time going to see the king of the Gilded Kingdom. In Lin Li's heart, nothing mattered more than the Divine Smith level mageth, and he didn't care if the king of the Gilded Kingdom wanted to go to war or not. Now, the reason that he agreed to Jefferson's invitation was mainly because he wanted to take this opportunity to give his mind a break and recover some energy. Of course, if the Gilded Kingdom went overboard, he wouldn't mind venting his anger again, and doing more damage to the Gilded Kingdom. Destroying the barracks was just a trivial matter, and he would be thrilled only if he hurt the Gilded Kingdom. Lin Li followed Jefferson out of the embassy, and the group soon arrived at the kingdom's palace. The palace guards then ushered them into the council hall. At this juncture, King Bradler of the Gilded Kingdom, and the ministers who were either supportive or against war were all waiting in the council hall, and had been doing so for a long time. The ministers who supported peace were reporting to King Bradler the list of compensations that they had worked out and collated overnight. On the other hand, those who supported the idea of going to war were watching the peace-supporting ministers sneeringly, looking forward to the final outcome. Jefferson first entered the council hall, and bowed to Bradler before saying, "Your Majesty, I've invited President Flick here, and he's waiting for you to call him." Bradler nodded with a stern expression, and said, "Okay, ask him to come here." Immediately afterwards, the palace guards outside the council hall began to exclaim, "Summon Flick, the president of the Dusk Tower of the Breezy Plains." A moment later, Lin Li stepped into the council hall, and looked around for a while before keeping his eyes fixed on King Bradler, who was sitting on the throne. He walked up and bowed to him out of courtesy. Before Bradler said anything, Lin Li said, "Your Majesty, is there a reason you asked to see me? What are you feigning ignorance for? You instructed your men to force their way into the barracks of the royal guards, hit my soldiers, and snatch the prisoners. Do you think you don't have to pay for that? The commander of the royal guards?" Kate barked furiously as soon as he saw Lin Li. Although it was now considered a good thing for those who were supportive of the war, the fact that it happened to the royal guards made him feel insulted. "Shut up, General Kate. Mind your words." Bradler first chided Kate before looking at Lin Li again. He then looked at Lin Li again with a slight frown, and said, "President Flick, General Kate is a little agitated, but what he mentioned is indeed the reason that I asked you to come here. This matter concerns the dignity of the Gilded Kingdom. I hope that you can give me an explanation." Bradler had previously adopted the advice of the peace supporters to take a more peaceful approach in the matter regarding the Breezy Plains, but it did not mean that he was a king with a weak character, who would let everyone else trample all over the dignity of the Gilded Kingdom. So when he spoke to Lin Li, there was also some anger and displeasure in his tone. When they heard the emotion in Bradler's tone, the several ministers who were war supporters were naturally secretly overjoyed, as that made them stop feeling worried. On the other hand, the peace supporters all seemed rather anxious, fearing that the king would forget about his previous plans in a moment of anger. Faced with Bradler's accusations, Lin Li merely smiled nonchalantly, and asked, "Explanation? What explanation do you want, Your Majesty?" In the eyes of the people in the Gilded Kingdom, Lin Li's expression was really infuriating. Even the peace supporters couldn't stand it anymore. If not for the consequences of starting a war, they would have declared war on the Tower of Dusk. On the contrary, the war supporters seemed to be much more composed than before. After all, they were very certain that the king would eventually declare war on the Breezy Plains, and it wouldn't be too late to wait until then to settle scores. A trace of anger appeared in Bradler's eyes, but he didn't lose his temper in the end. Instead, he turned to look at Cantori, who was standing beside Burgess, perhaps to curb his anger and avoid talking to Lin Li. Cantori, who had received a hint from Bradler, coughed gently and walked out from behind his father, Burgess. He then arrived in front of Lin Li, and slowly said, "President Flick, we meet again, but this time you've really given us a huge problem." Lin Li smiled, but he didn't say anything. He had agreed to come over with Jefferson only because he had momentarily reached a bottleneck in his research on maggots. Hence, he decided to come here to take a breather. To him, it didn't matter what the Gilded Kingdom wanted to do. Anyway, he wouldn't be at a loss. Seeing that Linley did not respond to him, Cantori didn't flare up as he merely smiled, and said, His Majesty didn't plan to pursue the matter regarding the Fifth Fleet out of consideration for our friendship, but, President Flick, you've truly crossed the line this time. For the sake of the kingdom's pride, we have the determination to fight the Tower of Dusk at all costs. However, His Majesty can't bear to see the breezy plains getting destroyed in war, so he has decided to give you a chance to redeem yourself. As soon as Cantori said that, King Bradler suddenly seemed extremely glorious and majestic, as if he would wage a war with no regard to the lives of the people in the breezy plains, if Linley did not agree to the conditions that the Gilded Kingdom was going to propose. Of course, Cantori knew very well in his heart that the arrogant and domineering Linley definitely wouldn't agree. However, he had to keep up with the act while also gaining the goodwill of King Bradler. In fact, after hearing Cantori's remarks about him, Bradler looked at the former with more admiration in his eyes. In the beginning, Bradler felt a little humiliated and embarrassed because he didn't dare to start the war due to various concerns despite being bullied. However, there was no other solution. As the king, there was too much for him to consider, and if he acted according to his mood all the time, the country would probably have been ruined. However, after hearing Cantori's words, Bradler felt much better. He wasn't scared of the Tower of Dusk, but rather he couldn't bear to kill all the people of the breezy plains. However, Linley couldn't help but sneer after hearing Cantori's words because he felt that the Gilded Kingdom was too incompetent to even kill the people in the breezy plains, let alone spare them. The navy of the Gilded Kingdom was indeed the top naval force in Anral, but in the eyes of a sanctuary powerhouse like Linley, it wasn't considered much. If the Gilded Kingdom couldn't deploy sanctuary powerhouses that could contend with Linley, all their troops would die regardless of how many they sent. Linley didn't know if there were any other sanctuary powerhouses in the Gilded Kingdom, but High Priest Power had been left in the world under the Cursed Island forever. The fact that he could become High Priest of the Gilded Kingdom, with such a low level of competency, meant that the abilities of the Gilded Kingdom's sanctuary powerhouses were definitely limited. Of course, the Gilded Kingdom was supported by the Illuminati, which was not inferior to the Supreme Council. The four saints whom Lin Li was aware of were definitely close to the peak of the sanctuary realm. However, even if the Illuminati gave their full support to the Gilded Kingdom, Linley wouldn't be afraid of the saints and elders. In fact, Linley didn't even need to seek help from the three arbitrators of the Supreme Council, as he had the support of the Ashen Warlock of the Breezy Plains, who was not inferior to the three arbitrators of the Supreme Council. However, no one knew that he owed Linley a huge favor, because his new perfect body was created by Linley using the Eternal Furnace. The Ashen Warlock had been created by the Immortal King, who most of the former skills originated from. In fact, Ashen Warlock seemed more like the Immortal King's inheritor than Osric did. Besides, Linley had several powerful trump cards, such as the powerful Sky Castle and the Dragon Horn, that could summon the Ice Blast Wyrm Sindera. If the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati joined forces to wage war on the breezy plains, the Gilded Kingdom would probably be the one to suffer. When Cantori saw that Linley was keeping a straight face, he knew that his speculations were probably going to come true. Since Linley refused to agree to the Gilded Kingdom's conditions, he could use this as a reason to ask his teacher to support the idea of waging a war on the Tower of Dusk. By then, it would be a piece of cake for them to overcome the young president of the Tower of Dusk with the abilities of the saints of the Illuminati. Of course, Cantori did not seem glad at all. Instead, he looked rather grim as he said with a heavy heart, His Majesty decided to give you another chance, President Flick, but you must publicly apologize to our kingdom, and compensate for all the losses of the royal guards and their barracks. Most importantly, President Flick, please hand over the several prisoners that you snatched away from us, as well as those who caused trouble at the premises of the royal guards yesterday. Linley couldn't help but be overjoyed after hearing the conditions laid out by the Gilded Kingdom. Not to mention the mages who had destroyed the barracks of the royal guards, he wouldn't hand over the sailors whom he had rescued, or else that would be a waste of his efforts in saving them. Linley glanced at Cantori calmly, and he suddenly smiled. The sincerity of the Gilded Kingdom has really touched me, but I have my own principles, and I won't regret what I've done, nor will I do something that I will regret, so I won't accept your conditions. President Flick, think carefully. This matter concerns the life and death of the Tower of Dusk and the Breezy Plains. Don't bring about a disaster to the Breezy Plains and the Tower of Dusk because of a moment of recklessness. Karen, one of the peace supporters, became a little anxious after hearing that Linley had turned them down without hesitation. Karen felt resentful towards Linley for his unwillingness to cooperate. Although he was a peace supporter and a minister of the Gilded Kingdom, and he felt just as insulted by Linley's behavior, he didn't want them to go to war. Apart from the impact on people's livelihood, he also didn't want to be suppressed by the ones who supported war. In contrast to Karen, the ministers who supported war, such as Burgess, felt rather smug and overjoyed even though they seemed agitated. Deep down, they really admired Cantori as he seemed to be compromising, but he was leaving the peace supporters with no way out. Seeing that the situation was developing in the direction he wanted, Cantori decided to add fuel to the fire and leave the ministers who supported peace speechless. Hence, he pretended to be sincere and asked President Flick, "Are you displeased with one of the conditions? We're just trying to find a win-win solution. Feel free to voice your opinions. What I mean is very simple. Firstly, I won't hand over my men, nor will I compensate you. I won't apologize, either, and I didn't come here to apologize this time. I would like an explanation for the fact that my sailors were arrested by the Gilded Kingdom for such absurd reasons during my absence," Linley said righteously as he stared at Bradler, who was on his throne. "Damn it, after such a long time, it's our fault again." Bradler was so infuriated that he was about to vomit blood. Of course, Bradler knew that there had to be some hidden agenda in this matter. He also felt that no matter how incompetent Vincent might be, he shouldn't have gotten into a conflict with the lowly sailors, since he was the prince of the Gilded Kingdom. However, at this point, it was no longer related to that matter. Most importantly, the Gilded Kingdom's pride could not be trampled on. "President Flick, no matter what happened with the sailors previously, why didn't you handle it using a normal method? The fact that you brought your men to create a scene at the Royal Guards barracks was an insult to the dignity of the Gilded Kingdom. You can't deny that, can you?" Bradler said, suppressing the anger within him. If possible, he would have tried to take down Linley. However, he also understood that since High Priest Power wasn't around, he wouldn't be able to take down a sanctuary powerhouse. "Is that so?" Linley couldn't help but sneer as he stared at Bradler without compromising, and said, "Since the dignity of the Gilded Kingdom is that important, can it be trampled on so easily by the Tower of Dusk? You have to earn pride and respect, not take it from others. Since the Gilded Kingdom is embarrassed, you should earn your pride back yourselves." The Tower of Dusk might only be one of the many forces in the breezy plains, but Linley didn't think that they were inferior to the Gilded Kingdom. Since the Gilded Kingdom dared to capture the people of the Tower of Dusk, it was already considered offensive and a provocation to the Tower of Dusk, regardless of how important the sailors were. Hence, Linley naturally would not be polite with the Gilded Kingdom. "President Flick, do you know that you're declaring war on the Gilded Kingdom?" exclaimed a middle-aged general who had been silent almost from the start. He was one of the several important ministers who were in support of war. After hearing his words, everyone in the council hall of the palace fell silent, while the military generals from both camps glowered at Linley furiously. The middle-aged general who spoke was tall and burly, with sideburns and a full beard on his face. He was clad in a navy blue uniform with golden embroidered hems. There was a golden whale emblem on the chest area of his uniform. It was of extraordinary significance, and was said to be one of the badges given by the founding king to the families of several statesmen, as a symbol of the highest honor of the Gilded Kingdom. The statesman's family that received the whale emblem had once been called the Whale family. The middle-aged general was Critia, the current patriarch of the Whale family. He was also the commander of the First Fleet, which was known as the Ace Naval Fleet of the Gilded Kingdom. As the commander-in-chief of the First Fleet, which was the kingdom's ace fleet, Critia could be considered the top military powerhouse in the kingdom, be it in terms of the strength of the fleet under his command, or the heritage of his family. Although Critia didn't quite express his opinion in the council hall of the palace, the generals who were in support of war were all voicing their opinions according to his wishes. Even Kate, the commander of the Royal Guards, who had never been on good terms with the Navy, was also very respectful to Critia. At the same time, while Critia was speaking of war, Bradler's face turned sullen, and he seemed to no longer have any expectation for the so-called peace. In fact, although the people of the Gilded Kingdom had greeted Linley and the representatives of the forces of the breezy plains with utmost respect using the national salute of the greatest honor, all of them, including King Bradler, actually didn't see the latter as important people who were worthy of being on equal status with them at all. Well, they couldn't be blamed for it. After all, the Gilded Kingdom was a human kingdom that was comparable to the Felon Kingdom, Leaden Kingdom, and Rotterdam Kingdom. While the forces of the breezy plains were merely regional forces, Bradler had previously gone to visit Linley and the others personally in a bid to resort to peaceful means, in order to eventually achieve his final goal of encroaching on the breezy plains. Once the kingdom really acquired the breezy plains, the forces including the Tower of Dusk, Mithril Alliance, and whatever would all be under the jurisdiction of the Gilded Kingdom. How could Bradler possibly put the Tower of Dusk and the other forces on a level equal with the kingdom? Hence, in the opinion of Bradler and the ministers of the Gilded Kingdom, the pride of the Tower of Dusk was second to that of the Gilded Kingdom. It was no big deal for the Tower of Dusk to be embarrassed, but the pride of the Gilded Kingdom could not be trampled on. Linley would never let himself lose out, hence, he naturally wouldn't give in to the Gilded Kingdom. After hearing Critia's blatant threat, Linley's face remained unchanged, and he simply answered nonchalantly as if nothing had happened at all. War, I'm looking forward to it too. Since you've taken things so far, I will wait for the Gilded Kingdom's army's arrival at the breezy plains. As soon as Linley said that, there was no longer any room for negotiation. Bradler's expression changed immediately, and then 20-30 warriors walked out from the corridors on either side of the throne. All of them were legendary powerhouses, and they stopped between him and Linley. At the same time, the throne that Bradler was sitting on also emitted a brilliant ray of light, and a large and powerful shield protected him. What a joke! How could Bradler not be prepared for a negotiation with a sanctuary powerhouse? If Linley were to make things hard for him, or even kill him, there would be no chance of regaining their pride anymore. However, Linley did not have the slightest intention of making a move, and watched the movements of the Gilded Kingdom with an icy cold gaze. When the legendary level guards of the Gilded Kingdom had set up a defensive battle formation, and catalyzed the magic shield to the maximum, he finally said in disdain, King Bradler, you underestimate me too much. If I really want to attack you, do you think you can stop me with this? Linley's words were not exaggerated at all. Although Bradler had put up several defenses that seemed to be very solid and strong, they could only withstand and block at most 1 or 2 attacks from the average sanctuary powerhouse. If Linley really wanted to kill Bradler, he could turn everything into ashes with a single light and darkness sword. Linley's words immediately made the people in the council hall nervous. At this point, all of them, regardless of whether they were in support of a war or not, thought of a deadly problem. It seemed to be a common thing for the president of the Tower of Dusk to take them by surprise and act out of the ordinary. If they really provoked him, he might get rid of all the elites of the Gilded Kingdom. It was instantly silent in the council hall, as if the air had frozen. When the tension between both sides rose, and they seemed to be ready to fight, the sound of footsteps suddenly came from outside the council hall, which sounded extraordinarily ear-piercing to the people in the hall. At this moment, Evrion's heart was about to jump out of their chest, and it was as if the slightest movement would lead to Linley misunderstanding them and attacking. However, immediately after the sound of those footsteps, 2 figures walked into the council hall one after the other. Upon seeing the people who entered, the people of Gilded Kingdom finally heaved a sigh of relief, because they were none other than Saint Edmund of the Chaos Sanctuary of the Illuminati and Elder Zoomer, who followed closely behind the former. They believed that Linley wouldn't be able to do anything with those 2 around. After Edmund led Elder Zoomer into the council hall, they were immediately shocked. Edmund then frowned and chided, "What are you doing here? Stand down." Kate, the captain of the royal guards, was immediately surprised when he saw the powerhouse Edmund. "Saint Edmund, Elder Zoomer, Fulik is going to harm His Majesty. Please help us take him down." The royal guards were originally in charge of guarding the capital, and if the king and ministers were now implicated because of the barracks incident, Kate would be in serious trouble. Even if he died here with all of them, his family would definitely not escape the sanctions of the kingdom. If the people found out about this matter, they'd probably be skinned alive. Hence, when he saw that Edmund had come, General Kate was really more excited than anyone else. In his opinion, Edmund was one of the 4 saints of the Illuminati, and his strength was close to the peak of the sanctuary realm. He felt that Linley was far from comparable to him. As long as Saint Edmund intervened, Fulik would have no choice but to swallow his pride and admit his mistake, no matter how arrogant he might be. Edmund and Zoomer were originally leading the team to 4 Seasons Island on the aircraft that Linley had left behind. However, before they could get far from Ice Island, Elder Zoomer remembered something terrible. High Priest Power had previously sent a message back to the Gilded Kingdom to say that he was confident of keeping Linley and the others of the Tower of Dusk on Ice Island forever. The 2 men didn't dare to imagine how the Gilded Kingdom would treat the representatives of those forces in the breezy plains and Linley's subordinates after learning of that news. They dared not imagine how Linley would react after he returned to 4 Seasons Island and learned those things that the Gilded Kingdom might have done. Hence, they were no longer in the mood to follow the aircraft and leave leisurely. After their injuries had healed a little, they immediately flew back to 4 Seasons Island as quickly as they could. After the 2 returned to the capital, they didn't go anywhere at all, and instead went to the palace to see Bradler in hopes that he hadn't gone overboard. However, they didn't expect to see such a scene with so much tension. As soon as they entered the council hall, "Bradler, come with me." Edmund did not have much of an expression. After all, he knew nothing about the situation yet. Hence, he called out to Bradler before walking towards the back of the council hall. Edmund was a sanctuary powerhouse from the Dark Age. Although Bradler was already advanced in his years, he wasn't as high in seniority. Besides, as the other was the saint of the chaos sanctuary of the Illuminati. Edmund's qualification and status were no worse than those of Bradler. Hence, he wasn't deferential to Bradler. Bradler was also relieved to see Edmund and Zoomer. With them around, he reckoned that no matter how powerful Linley was, he definitely wouldn't be able to hurt him. Hearing Edmund call himself, he hurriedly removed the defensive spells on the throne and ordered the legendary level guards in front of him to retreat. He then glared at Linley with hatred and followed Edmund to the back of the council hall. Edmund left with Bradler, while Elder Zoomer stayed in the council hall to watch the two parties to ensure that they wouldn't break into a conflict. Elder Zoomer approached Linley and said in a personable tone, "President Fulik, what happened? There must be some misunderstanding, right?" Elder Zoomer could tell that something must have happened between the Gilded Kingdom and Linley. However, as long as there was no fight, it was not to the point of no return. Hence, there was room to make amends. As the saying went, never slap a smiling person. Linley didn't give Elder Zoomer a hostile reaction and simply shook his head a little. He calmly said, "You have to ask them if there's a misunderstanding or not." Although he didn't hear any anger or other emotions from Linley's tone, Elder Zoomer's face turned sullen, and he turned to look at the people of the Gilded Kingdom. He asked, "Can someone tell me what exactly happened just now?" Elder Zoomer, "We actually don't want this to happen, either, but our efforts for peace don't seem to be recognized by President Fulik." Cantori could sense that there was something off about St. Edmund's and Elder Zoomer's attitude. Hence, before clarifying the situation, he chose not to complain and tried to explain things more tactfully. Of course, the generals who were in support of war did not share the same thoughts as Cantori. As soon as they thought that they now had two sanctuary powerhouses on their side, they felt that it was a good time to take down Linley. Hence, they immediately lost control of their emotions. Firstly, the leader of the royal guards, Kate, eagerly said to Elder Zoomer, "Elder Zoomer, Fulik has gone overboard this time. Not only did he break into the barracks of the royal guards to take the prisoners away by force, he also razed it to the ground and wounded countless warriors. He trampled on the Gilded Kingdom's pride, and yet he refused to even apologize." Hearing General Kate's words, Elder Zoomer couldn't help but frown. He sized Kate up, and then asked in a deep voice, "Prisoners, are you guys repeating Delano's trick? President Fulik is our guest. Is this how you should be treating our guests?" Previously, Delano framed the Star, S crew, and used the Fifth Fleet to seize the vessel, only to have his act exposed by Linley's time-lapse crystal ball. In the end, the Fifth Fleet suffered a huge loss, and the Gilded Kingdom became the party in the wrong. Hence, they no longer had the cheek to pursue the matter and hold it against the Tower of Dusk.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.